I'm Erin Tobin. I'm with the Preservation League of New York State. And thank you all for coming to our grant information webinar workshop this late afternoon. We're focusing today on our Preserve New York grants, which are one of our partnership grant programs with the New York State Council on the Arts. But we're going to talk a little bit about our other partnership program, the Technical Assistance Grant Program. And before we really get into the details of that, I just want to say thank you to the New York State Council on the Arts and the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for supporting our Preserve New York and our Technical Assistance Grant programs. We've been a program partner with NYSCA on Preserve New York since 1993. And we're so grateful for that partnership. Our partnership with the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation is since 2017. And that's also been a great partnership. They augment our program for projects in Nassau and Suffolk County, which means it benefits both projects on Long Island. And it also means that the Arts Council's money just can be spread more across the rest of the state. Those of you who may not know the Preservation League, we're the statewide preservation nonprofit. We are based in Albany, where I am here today in my sunroom at home, as we all are mostly these days during COVID. And we work statewide in every one of our 62 counties, urban, rural, suburban, everything in between. And the projects that we fund are reflect the diversity of our state in all those ways. We have a small staff of, right now we're actually down to 7, but normally fully staffed we're up to 8 staff, and we have a lot of different programs. We work with our local colleagues, we advocate for effective public policy initiatives and projects at the local, state, and federal level. We offer technical services. We highlight endangered historic resources, landscapes and buildings and other sites through our 7 to Save program. We have grants and loans like the ones we're going to talk about today. We also have a revolving loan program that works as a really nice bridge to Environmental Protection Fund grants or other kinds of rehabilitation projects when you need that initial money in. We have an Excellence in Preservation Awards program. And one of our favorite things is when we can see a site go from a 7 to Save, receive some of our grants, and then become an Excellence in Preservation Award recipient. And we're very proud of the sites that have done that, thanks to their grassroots local activists. We recently created a preservation book club that meets online. And we have programming around our book club. It's a really nice sort of casual way to read some interesting books and have some discussions. And then we offer scholarships to college students and graduate students looking to study historic preservation. So a little bit about capital project funding, which if you're here to learn about our Preserve New York program, you're likely interested in some sort of rehabilitation projects. And really this works across the board, both for capital projects, but for any grant applications. You want to think about how this project fits your mission. You want to think about, is this the best time to take on fundraising, to expect that you're not going to cover costs alone with grants, but be really ready to roll up your sleeves and commit some funds or some fundraising efforts to it. And then, of course, your need to hire qualified building professionals. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I like to say, you really get what you pay for in terms of preservation and really in terms of anything. And we strongly encourage people to find the best preservation professional, and that is really going to serve your project and your organization in the long run. So the things that we focus on in our grant programs are really the initial steps in planning for capital projects. We're talking about conditions assessments or other kinds of studies. The Preserve New York program really only funds specific types of reports that we'll get into, but they are very helpful for those future large capital project fundraising efforts when you're thinking about the site-specific reports. And this is just a nice kind of overview of what you might expect when you're faced with a historic site, landscape, building that needs investment, needs capital repair, and you're trying to figure out where to start. Or maybe you're someplace on this list and understanding both what's next and what you might need to move forward. So again, these are our partnership grant programs. Preserve New York is our spring program. That's the one probably most of you are here for today. Our technical assistance grant program runs every fall. So these are both annual programs. We will have them next year. And we reapply every few years to the New York State Council on the Arts for renewal of that program. So we know we have these funds next year, and we're hopeful that the partnership will continue. Again, for Preserve New York, we have additional support from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation. For our technical assistance grants, we have a third program partner in the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. So in the fall of 2020, we were able to award additional grants in the Hudson Valley, benefited from that partnership, and grants on Long Island benefited from the Gardner Foundation, and grants all throughout the rest of the state got increased opportunity because NISCA dollars didn't have to go to those regions as much. Technical assistance grants are like I said, those are the fall programs, and they are like both technical assistance grants and Preserve New York. There's some basic requirements, and one is that the applicant must be a nonprofit or a municipality. If it's a site-based report, then the applicant must own the building or have a long-term lease on the building of at least 6 years, but it really should be more because it's 6 years from that, the application date. So if then you don't get a grant and you have to reapply next year, you won't be eligible. So you really want to have, I always say, at least a 20-year lease. For a tag, the building has to have a specific arts or cultural purpose. And for both programs, we require a 20% cash match. For tag, our maximum award is $4,000. For Preserve New York, we don't really have a maximum. It tends to range in the $10,000, but we've certainly awarded $15,000, $20,000 grants. We just don't award quite as many of them. I'd say our average grant award for Preserve New York is closer to about $7,500 to $8,000. So Preserve New York has very specific project types. And I'll go into those, but again, it's all of those same requirements: a 20% cash match. Applicant must own or have a long-term lease on the site. A long-term lease defined as at least 6 years, hopefully more. Specific project types. In 2020, so those 3 specific project types are building condition reports, historic structure reports, cultural landscape reports, and cultural resource surveys. And that 4th type is a little bit different than the first 3, but all of them, for all of those project types, again, the applicant must be a nonprofit or municipality. We were able to make 19 grant awards back in last year, and awarding just over 193,000 in Preserve New York grants. So we're very proud of that, and we seek to have diversity in both the types of projects we award and some geographic diversity, but that is not a requirement. Again, these are those eligible project types for Preserve New York. The technical assistance grants have a bit more flexibility in their consulting project types. Preserve New York has very prescribed types of projects that we fund. The building condition report, this is something, it's one of our more recent project types, and it's a comprehensive condition report on a building. So it's something that is like not a specific look at your roof or your windows or your systems, but a report on the overall structure. It can be somewhat tailored based on the building's needs, but it needs to be a comprehensive report. This is not an engineering analysis of your systems. This is going to be a building condition report. And here's a great example of one we awarded. This is the Sullivan County Land Bank Corporation. They acquired this house and wanted to make sure to see that they, in order to be good stewards and figure out what the building would need, they came to us for a building condition report so that an architect could take a look, make an assessment, and any future purchaser would have that report in hand to understand what needs to happen to the building in order to repair and rehabilitate it. So this is a great example of the diversity of types of nonprofit and municipal entities that qualify for our grant programs. A Land Bank Corporation can receive our funds. We've awarded a grant to the Syracuse Land Bank Corporation as well. So the historic structure report, I like to refer to this, the building condition report is like a big chapter in the historic structure report. So, and if you're thinking about budget and cost, the historic structure report is going to be more expensive than the condition report because, again, it's bigger, it's more comprehensive. It's a soup to nuts history analysis of your building, your structure. So it's not just a condition report, but it's the building's history. It's architectural history, construction history, a history of the people who live there. It can include conservation assessments and perhaps a paint analysis. So I say often we don't necessarily recommend, because it's such an investment, it's something that's really for buildings that are interpreted to the public or that have a very interesting construction chronology that somebody undertaking a nonprofit or a municipality interested in undertaking a massive rehabilitation project wants to really understand. Again, this is a report that's really usually completed by an architect, often working with an architectural historian or preservation professional to augment the architectural work. None of these are construction documents. None of these are plans and specifications. These are the reports that then inform the project that you would do next to lead to the capital repair. And here in Rensselaer County, this is a great example of a building that's not really interpreted, but they commissioned a historic structure report. They received funding from us in this last round for a historic structure report. They also received funding from the State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation towards that same report. And they have a fabulous building with many interesting issues and a history that I think warrants that kind of larger document. So the landscape report, it's like a historic structure report, but for landscapes, and includes all those same elements, but with a bent towards a landscape. So the history of the landscape, the evolution of it, condition analysis, and description of cultural and or historic significance. This is really completed by a landscape architect. If it's not being done by a landscape architect, it needs to be done by somebody with extensive landscape experience and knowledge. And when I say, architect and landscape architect, these are professionals that need to have experience working with historic buildings and historic landscapes. Not, many landscape architects and building architects work with new construction. And historic buildings and historic landscapes are very much their own particular animal. And especially with the landscape, a landscape architect trained in the history and historic landscapes can read the landscape in a really special way. And here, this is our another grant we made last year, the Howland Stone Store Museum, and known as Open Door. And this is a situation where they are doing a historic landscape report. They want to understand their landscape for restoration purposes, also to help inform where they put new things, like, for example, a parking lot. Where would be the best place on their site to introduce modern necessities. And this is one of the things that landscape reports can be very helpful in, is helping a site understand its grounds so that, you know, you don't put a parking lot on the kitchen garden when you might really want to reinterpret and bring that kitchen garden back. So this is, I think this is a great example of how a site might use a landscape report. So then we have cultural resource surveys, and those are, as I said, a different kind of project. The three that I just described are site-specific projects. And if you're applying for one of those three project types, those three reports that I just discussed, you need to own the building or have a long-term lease on the building. And then if you, and so the cultural resource survey category is an inventory of historic resources. Seeing that it's in a municipality, I didn't catch that. That's not quite right, because we can fund types of historic resources throughout different municipalities. But they're looking at either a place or a particular building type. So for example, we funded surveys that look at 20th century lustron homes. These are the metal homes that were built post World War II as prefabricated houses. And so we funded a cultural resource survey of all the different types of lustron homes in New York State. And then, or we can also look at a particular neighborhood, or if it's a village, we've done village-wide cultural resource surveys. Or you can look at a particular type of resource in a place. So a historic farmstead survey, or a survey of historic synagogues or historic churches in a community. So there's a lot of variations on what a historic, what a cultural resource survey can be, but it's looking at multiple buildings, and that's really the key to it. So here you go in the different types of resource surveys. The reconnaissance level survey is that initial baseline survey. So for example, if you're in a neighborhood that has not been studied before and you're interested perhaps in becoming a National Register Historic District, you might first start with a reconnaissance level survey to understand where the boundaries of that district might be, what kinds of buildings you have there. Are there locally or are there individually significant buildings within that area? And it provides kind of the background and basis for a National Register nomination or a local historic district. When both of those documents are something that's more intensive, where then they're creating the boundaries, justifying those boundaries, and going even more in depth to the description of the place and its significance. And here's an example in Binghamton. This is a cultural resource survey we also funded last year, where the city wanted to expand its historic district potential, thinking in large part about different financial incentives that are available, but also celebrating the different neighborhoods within the city. And so, you know, many different kinds of neighborhoods can be surveyed for historic district potential, both downtowns and residential neighborhoods. They don't always have to look classically pretty. The storefronts don't have to be perfectly intact. They can display the evolution of history throughout that place. So a little something about the National Register that I just mentioned. It's something that it's a primarily honorary designation, not local designation. It's not, it doesn't require that if you're on the National Register, you have to pull a local permit to get permission to do something to your building, unless it's also locally designated. A building can be part of a historic district, or it can be individually designated. The bar is higher if it's an individual designation in terms of interior integrity. It's a program that's managed by our State Preservation Office, which is within our Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. But then it's ultimately controlled by the National Park Service. So our State Preservation Office lists buildings and structures and districts on the state register. And then here in New York State, those really just go automatically down to the Park Service to be on the National Register. It can signify different types of significance: architectural significance, historic and cultural significance, and at all levels. Just because it's called the State and National Register doesn't mean it needs to have state and national significance. It can be significant locally, and most designations are locally significant, and still be listed on the State and National Register. And what does that mean for property owners? There are different incentives. So in the first place, it's a real point of pride for many communities. It's something that many communities and neighborhoods and municipalities are very proud of. They'll put it on their banners and signs. You're entering this historic district. Again, this is National Register. Some people do it for local designation too. Those are two different buckets. I'm talking about the National Register bucket. And then it opens up possibilities for historic tax credits and grants. And that's something that we see really increasing the popularity of surveys and designations in New York State, is that we have a state historic tax credit, which includes a homeowner credit or a historic commercial tax credit that piggybacks on a federal one. And we offer webinars and programs about those tax credits. One is actually coming up, and there'll be a note about it at the end here. So I could be talking about those programs for an hour or two on their own. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but I think it's important to know that these are benefits. So if you're in this event right now and you're looking to do a cultural resource survey for your community, these are the real benefits to help you talk about that project with your community members. And the picture you have here, this is a resource through the State Preservation Office, where you can see here in the orange, it's places that qualify for the state historic tax credit. And then in the red, those are historic districts. This is here in Albany. But it's a good way. The state has a wonderful mapping system that you can explore and see in your community what's designated, what qualifies for the historic tax credit, and what might be a really great place to have a survey. You'll see in Albany, I don't know if you can see my mouse, there's a big section that hasn't been studied, that isn't on the National Register. So here's the link, and we'll have this program up on our website, but if you want to take down this web address, and if I am able to during question and answer, I'll try to drop it in the chat. That web link will take you to the State Historic Preservation Office. Again, they're the ones who manage the National Register program and the Historic Tax Credit program. And you go to that contact page and you can find your person for your county. They break down their service regions by county. And there's the information about our webinar on March 10th, where you can learn more about the historic homeowner tax credit. I'll leave that up for just a minute more. And this will be posted on our website as a YouTube link, so you can review the webinar, but we'll also perhaps post the PDF of this presentation so that the links will be active and you can go and you can click through. So the nuts and bolts, I told you a bit about what we fund. And now a little bit about writing the grant. And people sometimes think, oh, I need to hire a grant writer. The idea of grant writing can sound very intimidating. We don't want our applications to be that way. They are meant to be filled out by advocates and volunteers and people with other full-time jobs that they have to do. So the first step is to fill out our pre-application, which is available online. Once you fill that out, and it's just a few questions really to make sure that you're eligible. Things like if it's a site, are you a nonprofit or municipality? If you're applying for a site-specific report, do you own your building or have a long-term lease on it? Tell us what you want to have funded, because we won't fund capital work. We won't fund churches. We won't fund schools. We won't fund New York State-owned sites. Those are regulations we have through that New York State Council on the Arts Partnership. It's written into their law. So we can't fund those things. You fill out the pre-application. League staff person will respond with our full application document. And if there's any questions about eligibility, we'll talk about that. You'll want to reach out to your consultant, because we don't require that you have your consultant selected by the time of the application, but it's a very good idea. You want to know, you want to have a proposal from your consultant. You don't want to go in contract with them. We're not a reimbursement grant, but you want to have a proposal from the consultant so you know what your budget's going to be. You might think you have a project that's only $10,000, and you might get proposals from 3 different architects, and they might come back with anywhere from $12,000 to $20,000. So you want to know that going into the application process. And then the grant panel does review the consultant's qualifications. So if you maybe you haven't gotten to where your municipality and you can't make that selection, you send us your 3 top choices and we'll evaluate accordingly. But it's always a much stronger application if you have your consultant in hand, ready to go if you're awarded a grant. And I'll just say that our applications are very competitive. We get twice as many applications or more than we can fund. So in 2020, I think we were only able to fund 1/3 of our applications. It can be quite competitive. So please keep that in mind. And that's why, if you're thinking about applying for a grant, really, I highly recommend reaching out to that consultant and getting that ball rolling. And we have a list of consultants who've done league funded projects before, and we'll share that. We don't put it on our website, but we're happy to share it over email. It's not a comprehensive list. We always say with a disclaimer that we love to add to the list. So if you know someone who's qualified, don't feel like you have to take from our list. It's just our best way of saying, here's the list of people who've successfully done a grant project. We're not vetting them and reviewing their qualifications. We just know they've successfully completed a grant funded project. So that's about consultants. So in terms of the photos are incredibly important. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes, but take pictures of your building or your survey area. Give us an overall, give us a streetscape. Let us see the entire building. You don't have to be a photographer, but it really matters that we have a good image of your building, because the grant reviewers likely have never been to your community, and we try to go, but if we happen to be there on a rainy day, we're not going to get good photos, and during COVID, we're not doing site visits, so we can't use any photos we take. It's really up to you as the applicant to get some good photos. They can just be with your phone, that's fine. Just step back and make sure you get the overall building. Go over your checklist very carefully. We'll say that about 5 more times before the end of this presentation, because it's so important. We accept the applications over email in this round, and it's very important that you include all of the required documents. Follow the instructions. That's grant writing 101. Anyone can write a grant if they follow the instructions and know something about the project and what they're doing, what they're seeking the grant for. Submit the materials on time. We cannot award them. We cannot award or consider applications that are late. And don't be afraid to ask questions. And there's a question in the chat about who to contact. You'll see in a moment our a list of who to contact about grant questions. You can contact me. I'm one of them. And then there's 2 of my colleagues. So how are the applications reviewed? We have an independent panel with experts from around the state. So, so we don't do the scoring of staff. Our outside panel does. And here's a picture of us in the times when we could all sit around a table in the Preservation League's conference room. And that's my head with much shorter hair. We probably need a newer picture. But we evaluate the grants on 3 criteria, and this is all laid out in the guidelines and application form. They're historic preservation and project excellence, fiscal and managerial competence, and service to the public. And you're going to be scored individually based on each of those 3 criteria, and then that score is averaged. So each one of those categories matters. If you have a fabulous project with a great consultant and your fiscal and managerial house is in order, but you're not doing anything to contribute to your community with the project that you're seeking, and you don't have a lot of community engagement and support, you're probably not going to get funded. So each one of those categories matters. And that fiscal and managerial competence piece, that's where if you don't complete the application, if you're missing a document, that's the category where you'll have points taken off, because part of fiscal and managerial competence is being able to read and follow the instructions and submit all of the required documents. So just double, triple check all those attachments. And it's also where we look at governance. If you're a nonprofit and your board consists of a husband, wife, and their daughter is also the executive director, and she has a 6-figure salary, you're not going to get very high points for fiscal and managerial competence. So that's just basic sort of nonprofit management. If you're a municipality applying and the municipality isn't putting in any money towards the project, you might not score as highly on fiscal and managerial competence. It's great to have public-private partnerships where if you have, a historical society or some private fundraising effort towards a project, we absolutely applaud that. But we really expect the applicant, especially a municipality, to have some skin in the game. It can be $500. I think every municipality can find $500. We've had some of the lowest income, most cash-strapped, small, tiny villages in rural counties come up with $1,000 or $2,000 for a project. So ironically, it's usually the wealthiest towns and villages that have the hardest time putting in any money. So if you're a town or village official, here's something you can take back to your town board. And if you're a local advocate, here's something you can say, in order to get the grant, there has to be some give in that way. Other funding sources in New York State, this is something that often comes up in our presentations. And so we have this list. There's different, this Genesee Valley Rural Revitalization Grant is a brand new program that's a partnership with the Landmark Society of Western New York and the State Preservation Office. And that's for counties, kind of Monroe, Orleans County going south to Allegheny. I don't know if it includes Shenango County, but and I can't see anyone, so I don't know if anyone's from any of those counties, but that's a new program. And then there's some more longstanding programs. We also often partner with the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. They don't have survey grants right now because of budget issues, but often if you're in the Hudson Valley and undertaking a cultural resource survey, the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area has been a great source of funds to help match our grants. So we work a lot with them. These are grants for historic religious properties that don't qualify for the Preservation League's grants. The Landmarks Conservancy Sacred Sites Program is a fabulous resource. These are capital funds that are available for sites, worship spaces that are on the National Register. So they have to be on the National Register in order to qualify. It can be part of a historic district. But these are the Landmarks Conservancy Sacred Sites program is one of the very few programs for, that offers those capital funds for historic sites. Our state's Environmental Protection Fund program does as well, but the state's EPF program is extraordinarily competitive. It can take multiple applications in order to be awarded a grant from the state EPF Historic Preservation Fund. Our deadline. So here's our contact information for if anyone, for the participant who asked about who to contact for questions. The Preserve New York deadline is April 12th. You still have plenty of time to fill out a pre-application and get your application form and get working on it. Once you submit your pre-application, you will probably hear from Shelley Carr, who's our executive assistant, or Jana Rudler, who's our Southern Tier Field Services consultant. And she's been working more statewide right now. Those of you who may have applied in the past, Frances Gubler was our grants manager for a number of years, and she's moved on to a position with the state. So if you're doing a state tax credit, you might end up working with her. And we haven't quite filled that full-time position yet because that transition happened during COVID. We ended up with a hiring freeze, but we haven't missed a beat, and Shelley and or Jana will respond with questions. I'm also always available. I specifically wanted to be the one to give this presentation so that people could contact me too. It's just Shelley and Jana are probably going to be your first points of contact. And that email, that grants@preservenys.org, that goes to all three of us. Shelley and Jana, again, they're the first responders on it, but any question that they can't answer, I'll either help them answer or I'll end up answering. And then you can also, my email is, I'll put it in the chat once I close out of the screen sharing. So some upcoming webinars that we're having. This is the last of this grant workshop presentations where we go through, and then in March and early April, right before the deadline, what Jana and I are doing are holding drop-in workshops that are really workshops. So alternating Mondays and Thursdays in March and April, we're going to just at different times, and they're on our website. We're going to open up a Zoom meeting, and you can just drop on in and ask questions and have a conversation. So sort of like if we were in a storefront with open office hours and a drop-in center just over Zoom. So it's something that's somewhat new. We're trying out. Instead of having a bunch of the same presentation over and over, we'll have this up on our website, encourage everybody who's not here to take a look at it, and then be available for drop-in questions. On March 10th, there'll be a historic homeowner tax credit workshop. So especially those of you who might be thinking about cultural resource surveys in your communities, this would be a great thing to attend to learn more about these homeowner tax credits. They're the best. It's such a good incentive that our state has, that the owner of a historic home in an economically distressed census tract or city can get 20% back on work they do in their house, which includes, roof repair, purchasing a new boiler, some really mundane, but really important and necessary work for your historic house can qualify under this historic homeowner tax credit, as well as, more detailed restoration work, but, redoing your, repairing your porch, repairing your siding, storm windows. Those are one of my favorite qualifiers. Several homeowners in Albany have done that. I encourage everyone to drop in to the March 10th. I think you do have to pre-register. And then on March 22nd, Jana will be hosting a technical talk about historic windows as spring is coming. So you can go and register on our website, which is preservenys.org. And you can find all this information out on our website, which is right here. All of these events are up on our Facebook page. We normally post some of them on our Instagram feed, but our Facebook page is really where to go for this kind of information on events and programs. Instagram's mostly just pictures of great buildings. Our YouTube channel has this presentation. It has Jana's presentation from earlier this month, as well as presentations from months past. And we hope that hopefully most people on this webinar today are already Preservation League members, but if you're not, we hope you consider joining us. Our membership starts at a pretty accessible, I think it's $50, maybe it's $55 for a year, and we hope that everybody does join us. We don't require membership in order to apply for our grants or receive our technical services or get any of our time. We do this as a nonprofit, but our work is supported and possible thanks to our members. And that is it. I'm going to